Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, let me continue this session. And I will talk about the types of privatization. And these types of privatization is privatization without ownership transfer. And privatization without ownership transfer has 5 different categories. The first one is selling minority share and contracting out and empowering consumer, greenfield privatization, and termination of business of SOE. Okay? These are the one type of privatization in a broad sense of the word, but they are not involved in ownership transfer. But they are privatization in a broader sense. First is selling a minority share. Okay? When you have 100% government share, if you sell 10% of it, it is a selling of minority share. Okay? And next is contracting out. You can say that it is a privatization of operation, okay, rather than ownership. Next is empowering consumer. Rather than having your national organization provide goods and services to the people, you can provide financial support directly to the consumer, so the consumer can buy goods and services from private sector. Okay? So this is a way of privatization as well. Greenfield privatization is a way of inviting new firms. Okay? You just let the state-owned enterprise do their business, and you also invite new firms so that they can compete with SOE. It is one way of privatization. Finally, when SOE stops some of their businesses, then it is also one kind of privatization. Okay? Out of these 5, let me introduce these 3 cases a little bit more. Contracting out. It's an agreement between government and the private sector. Government provides some money to the private sector so that the private sector can provide some goods and services to the government. Okay? And there are 2 different types. Specific service can be outsourced. Whereas outsourcing is one example of contracting out. Okay? When the specific service is contracted out, we say outsourcing. One example is toll collection function of Expressway Corporation in Korea. Toll collectors in Korea are not a staff member of Expressway Corporation. Expressway Corporation asks the other company work for them in this toll collection. Okay, that's outsourcing. There is a contract between Expressway Corporation and toll collection company. Okay. Second is organizational level. Whereas this is just one part of the function of Expressway Corporation, this organization level asks us operation of the whole organization to the private sector. So museum and theater is an example. I will talk about a little bit more later. There is a positive side of this contracting out. Okay, well, since private sector is more efficient, the government can save money and improve the quality of the service. And however, during the process of competitive bidding, you may sacrifice the quality of the service. Okay? And of course, there is a strong resistance from the current incumbent supplier. Okay? Sometimes when you consider the outsourcing, the current member, for instance, toll collectors, used to be in the Expressway Corporation. And Expressway Corporation separated this function and spun off this function to the independent, separate entity. And they privatized it. And they become privatized by this outsourcing. So this outsourcing and contracting out also creates a lot of criticism and resistance from the current supplier. Okay? The privatization by organizational level contracting out has two different forms. Expressway, harbor, these can be contracted out to private sector, and so that this private company earn revenue from toll, which is one form of fees from the users. But the case of museum or schools, the revenue from these operation is not enough. So even though a government asks a private sector to operate a certain museum, they may refuse to, sign a contract because it's not, they cannot expect much revenue out of it. In that case, government can provide a subsidy so that the private sector can have enough of financial resources to operate this museum or school. Okay? So this contracting out is one legitimate way of privatization, but they do not transfer the ownership, but they transfer only the operation of it. That's the difference between the privatization in the narrow sense of the word, which we will cover later, soon. And consumer empowerment is, of course, is one type of privatization. For instance, when you have national hospitals without any private hospitals, you provide all the budget for the national hospitals. Instead, you provide those financial sources to the public through social insurance, in this case health insurance, so that this health insurance can pay the medical bill when the consumer try to purchase the service from the private hospital. This social insurance can pay for it, and government can subsidize this social insurance instead of supporting national hospitals. So in the past, you only had a national hospitals, and you so heavily subsidized these national hospitals, but later you only subsidize this social insurance so that people can pay for their medical expense to the private hospitals. So you can privatize national hospitals to private hospitals by consumer empowerment. You provide financial sources not to national hospitals, but to your consumers, so that they can purchase services from private hospitals. So this is one form of privatization, and you can utilize this in terms of national university and public child health care. And new form is, of course, is much more efficient, and bringing these new forms is one way of a privatization. Okay, and new form will facilitate privatization, and also privatization helps entry of new firms. So there is a virtuous cycle between new firms and privatization. Okay, so bringing new competition by new firms is a very serious threat to the current SOEs, and that is a very effective means to improve the efficiency of the SOEs. So when SOEs resist to privatization, try to bring competition by new firms. Okay, let me talk about the more detailed method of privatization. Okay, there are 4 criteria of privatization method. Okay, the privatization method should make market efficient. Okay? The privatized company should be efficient, and the market should be efficient. And the government should maximize the sales of their share. And also, there are public interests involved. The price and quality of the service, and also economic balance is also a concern of the people. Economic concern refers to concentration of economic power between small and medium-sized and big firms. And also dominance of foreign capital is also an issue for the public. Finally, feasibility of privatization is also a very important criteria as well. Finally, the transparency and anti-corruption is also very important during the process of privatization. So privatization method should accomplish these 5 different goals. Okay, privatization method by the number of new owner. Probably this slide will be the most important slide in this second session. And the first method is direct sale to one new owner. Okay, you sell your SOE to one owner. Okay, and the second method is you sell your SOE to multiple owner, but it is an outside owner. Outside means outside of your SOE. Compared to that, this majority share to insider includes EBO and MBO. That is a way of selling your share to insiders of your SOE. That means your employees and the managers of your SOE. Okay. Finally, mass privatization is a way of selling your share to all the nationals in your country. Okay? In that case, there is no clear owner. Everybody is an owner. Okay? So what is the positive and negative aspect of each options? Well, first, the direct sale to one new owner is most efficient method because it creates one specific owner who knows what to do for himself or herself. So means that it is a fully privatized company. However, you may not be able to find the buyer because this buyer will have to buy the one big company as a whole. Okay? So when you have limited capital in your country, you may not be able to find this new owner. And in the process of finding that new owner, maybe corruption issue may arise. Second, the multiple major shareholder has both a positive and negative aspect. It all depends on board of directors. If you have a good board of directors, well, it guarantees a check and balance. But when you have a wrong board of directors, they may collide each other, or they may be hostile against each other. So in either case are bad. So it all depends on the board of directors. The third case of EBO and MBO is good in terms of managing resistance because they are selling this state-owned enterprise to the employees or to the manager of those SOE. So the staffs and managers of SOE will become a shareholder after the privatization. So they can make their own future. So they will be more relieved. So they shows less resistance when you utilize this method. However, this method is very inefficient because you cannot bring new management. You cannot bring restructuring. Okay? So although you privatize this state-owned enterprise by EBO or MBO type, even after the privatization, they will act like a state-owned enterprise, although it is privatized. Okay. Mass privatization is good in terms of equality because everybody in your country will become a shareholder. And it is also good for capital mobilization because everybody contribute their money to buy this government share. However, when everyone is a shareholder, nobody is the owner. When there is no owners, who will act like an owner? It's the government. So government influence will remain if you follow this privatization method. That means state-owned enterprise, even after being privatized, is not really fully privatized company. They are still under the influence of the government. Okay? So there is a positive and negative aspect of all these method, and you can see that this direct sale to one owner and mass privatization, those two are very different options in the opposite direction. Okay? Direct sale emphasizes efficiency, and mass privatization emphasizes equality and the feasibility. But direct sale is very efficient, but it may not be easy to invite the buyer who will buy this, the big state-owned enterprise. Of course, you can combine two options together. Okay? So as I mentioned, if you follow efficiency, one new owner is the best option, but it may not be feasible. Okay? So feasibility and efficiency, these two are conflicting the criteria. So in general, from the efficiency point of view, so one new owner is the best option, but when it is not possible, sometimes you will have to invite foreign capital. However, selling your SOE to foreigners, especially when it is very important for your country, it is not very advisable. So in that case, you may have to give up this option. But I hope you to try to find the new owner as much as possible, because that's the best option for efficiency. But when it is not possible, you may resort to the other options. Because other options such as EBO or MBO and mass privatization, they are very inefficient. Okay? Multiple outside owner, single outside owner, they are much more efficient method of privatization. Of course, new firm is the best in terms of performance. And of course, SOE and government is in the lowest ranking in terms of its efficiency. Why it is the case? Of course, it is because of better accountability of new firms and less government intervention and stronger restructuring of new firms. Okay? So when you cannot privatize SOE, and when you feel that these are the only options for you, then maybe it's better to bring new firms. Okay? And privatization by these methods will result in inefficient private sector. And I strongly doubt about the effectiveness of such privatization. In that case, it's better to just bring new firms so that these new firms can compete with SOEs. Of course, you will have to maintain equal ground between SOE and these new firms so that they can enjoy competitive neutrality. There should be a clear and fair competition between SOE and the newly invited private company. Sometimes we may have to wait before we come to the final stage of privatization. The reasons are as follows. Sometimes we have to list your SOE first in the stock market before you privatize it. Because privatization in the stock market enhances the transparency, but it is not a must process. Sometimes when you list your SOE in the stock market, it's good for transparency, but it may delay the whole privatization process. Okay? And restructuring of industry could be an example, could be a reason of phased approach. Sometimes you may have a profit-generating function and the public function. You cannot privatize these two functions at the same time. In that case, you will have to separate these two functions. Okay? Profit-generating functions and public functions should be separated. Okay? So that you can privatize profit generation function only. Okay? In that case, you need time for this separation. Third, bringing competition. Bringing competition takes time. And sometimes downsizing will be necessary because it will be very difficult to sell your very inefficient SOE to the private sector. In that case, you may have to downsize your SOE first before you sell your SOE. It will enhance the market price. But of course, downsizing is not an easy job. Okay? When you privatize listed SOE, you may need a restriction on share, okay, in order to form a major shareholder. If you sell in a competitive bidding without any restriction, then you do not know what will happen because there will be so many investors, and so you don't know what will be the outcome of this privatization. So when you privatize your listed SOE, okay, or when you privatize with IPO, then it's better to put on some restriction on the number of buyers and their maximum share. Then you can construct the governance structure of the privatized company. However, when you privatize unlisted SOE, it's okay to go ahead with bidding without restriction. Because in most of the cases, this privatization of unlisted SOE follows direct sale as a whole. Then you can expect what will be the outcome of your privatization if you follow this direct sale as a whole. But you still can have a qualification criteria for bidders. Okay? So this qualification criteria is different from this restriction on the number of buyers, okay, as a maximum share. So you have to remember that listing SOE is not a prerequisite for privatization. Okay? If you list your SOE in the stock market, you can invite more investors in a more transparent way. So that's a positive aspect. However, it may delay the privatization process. So you will have to think about whether you have to list your SOE before you privatize it. Okay. Of course, there's also you have to consider whether you have to sell your majority share first or minority share first, or whether you can sell the whole SOE, at once. If you can follow this direct sale as a whole, it will be the fastest way. Okay, of course, capital mobilization is a concern, As long as you can invite the buyer, this direct sale as a whole is the best way. But when it is not easy to do so, you may have to sell your majority share first or minority share first. Selling minority share is easier because you can invite investors easily because it is a minority share. Okay? And of course, you can wait until the stock market is good. Okay? And when the stock market is booming, you can sell majority share at that moment. However, it can delay the privatization. Okay? Therefore, you may want to split sale the majority share first. In that case, you can enjoy selling the rest of the share with a higher price. After the privatization, the stock price goes up. So your remaining share, the minority share, will become very expensive. So you can maximize your sales revenue. And of course, government can maintain its influence by holding minority share. But of course, this government influence will be very negative to the sales price from the investor's point of view. Okay? And governments always worry about the negative impact of privatization on the stock market, because if you try to sell your SOE in the stock market, the price will go down, and the general index will go down, right? So the investors will not like that government's privatization. Therefore, the sales outside of the stock market, such as block sale, can be an answer to that worries. Okay? And if you sell your SOE outside of the stock market, then you can avoid this the market influence, stock market influence. But of course, there is a transparency issue. Okay? Well, that is it for this session, and I'll be happy to answer your question if there is any. Thank you very much.